Chapter 11 Chaos Theory October 26th, 2060 Ruins of XCOM Headquarters, 2015 era, Kansas. Akira had not felt so full of pride and joy in a very long time, and the dumbfounded expression on her parents' faces was making her feel even better. The euphoria she felt at watching the Kakama vanish had not quite worn off yet, so she impulsively launched into an explanation. "Dad, it was incredible! Dr. Weir theorized that tampering with a hyperspace system in the right way could desynchronize time and space if you tried to jump while opening a Vengate at the same time. But the power requirements were so intense that a short jump system would just burn out after one trip. So we rigged the Kakama for..." Blake finally found his voice and interrupted. "Wait a minute! Hold on! Where is that ship? Where's Julian?" Inez couldn't contain her excitement. Just like Scarlett, she spoke in a dreamy, faraway tone. "Signor Robinson, maybe you should ask, when and where will Julian be? Both are important now." Chihiro looked like she might panic. She suddenly started looking around as though she expected the Kakama to rematerialize and crush her at any moment. Blake grabbed Akira by the shoulders and held tight as she reflexively tried to pull away. Akira could sense a cascade of emotions flowing from her parents and was relishing in their confusion. Chihiro, in particular, was having trouble accepting the fact that her daughter had constructed a time machine. Blake's mind was filled with fear, but to Akira's surprise, she sensed that Blake wasn't afraid of her contraption, but rather, for the first time, Blake was afraid of his own daughter. "Akira," her father asked slowly, "when and where did you send Julian?" Akira nodded to Ingrid, who reached into her pocket and produced two items, a stopwatch and a homing beacon receiver. "We sent Julian 1 hour into the future," Akira explained. "Just 1 hour. But the thing is, the Kakama will remain in the exact same point in space. Only time is moving, so the ship will rematerialize in the same spot, but the Earth, the Sun, and the whole galaxy will have moved to another position." Blake and Chihiro looked at one another, then gazed at Akira's companions. "So that means..." "The Kakama is going to reappear in deep space," Inez finished. Half an hour later, Akira found herself being ushered aboard the Archangel alongside many others. It was the first time in her life she'd seen the old warbird filled to capacity. Her parents were in the cockpit. Asuna, Alexander, Josiah, and James were crammed together at the weapons stations, making room for Inez, Ingrid, Pascal, and Scarlett. Also on board was Central Officer Bradford, Chief Engineer Lily Shen, and Lead Scientist Richard Teigen. As the spaceplane roared down the runway and into the night, Dr. Teigen skimmed the research papers Akira took from Site X. He let out a low whistle of amazement. "Opening a dimensional gateway at the same moment as a hyperspace jump is incredibly risky, but its utility is limited due to the fact that time only flows in one direction. Yet I foresee a number of potential applications of this concept. It is most intriguing." Chief Engineer Shen was less impressed. "That was my dad's robot, Robinson," she chastised Akira. "You're going to be on the hook if I have to rebuild him." Akira herself was feeling too excited to feel anything else. Of course, she always planned to use the Archangel to recover Julian from space, but in her mind, neither of her parents were part of the expedition, nor did she have their consent to take the spaceplane. Once everyone was seated and strapped in, Chihiro throttled up the engines and sent the ship careening down the runway before launching into the night sky. Out of her window, Akira watched the dark clouds draw nearer and nearer until all was dark and murky, as though they were sailing through seas rather than the open sky. But all that changed when the Archangel suddenly punched through the top of the cloud layer. All at once, the sky was filled with brilliant stars. Constellations winked through the haze as hundreds and then thousands of stars came into view. Hanging in the darkness like a celestial medallion, the moon looked down on the rising spaceplane. Akira held her breath in anticipation. She had flown into space twice before, when the Archangel flew suborbital hops from one continent to another. She had never orbited the Earth, let alone gone where the ship was going today. Deep space. Behind Akira, the twins were trying to have some fun. They reached forward and snatched Alexander's eye patch, then tossed it into the air, shouting, "0G indicator!" Josiah called out before letting go of the eye patch. Instead of falling to the floor, Alexander's eye patch started to lazily drift through the cabin, floating up to the ceiling as the spaceplane finally shut down her engines and began coasting into space. At the same time, several of the computer banks in the crew area lit up and started working. Blake's voice came from the cockpit. "Whoever is at the sensors manager, start scanning for the Kakama." "We told Julian to launch a distress beacon as soon as he came back into normal space," Akira chimed in. "You should be able to hear it by now. Just scan the location where Earth was an hour ago, and that's where he should be." Chief Shen unstrapped herself and drifted over to the sensor suite and started her search. The aging spaceplane turned to face the Earth's shadow, aiming her transceiver array into the direction Akira suggested. A moment later, Shen called out, "I've got something! Listen up!" And then a computerized voice could be heard over the loudspeaker. "So, I'm still here. Robinson? Freeman? Etienne? Anybody? I'm not really bothered by the fact that the ship has rematerialized hundreds of miles away from its starting position. No, I'm more upset by the fact that my internal chronometer seems to be out of sync with the sun, the planets, the stars, and, frankly, the whole universe." "That's Julian!" Akira and Shen both declared. The Archangel turned hard and burned her engines towards the signal. After several minutes of speedy travel, the spaceplane cut her engines, flipped over, and started to burn her engines in the opposite direction to slow down. A few moments later, the tumbling wreck of the Kakama came into view. One by one, every single person in the crew compartment turned to look at Akira. She could sense an incredible array of emotions coming from each person. But there was one feeling that all of her family and their friends had in common. Fear. It was right then and there that Akira realized she was in danger. October 27th, 2060. A conspiracy was brewing. Time was short. Akira could read the minds of everyone around her, and everyone around her knew Akira could read their minds. Throughout the entire return flight to Kansas, the Archangel was the site of a mental Cold War between Akira and her own family. Blake and Chihiro were genuinely terrified of what their daughter had done, what she'd created. They feared its potential and what it could be used for. At long last, they understood all too perfectly the pair of images Akira had sketched onto her bedroom walls. The crushed butterfly, and the serpent eating its own tail. The Robinson parents finally grasped the full scale of the situation, and immediately resolved to stop Akira from acting on her plan. As soon as the group returned to Kansas, Akira was taken off the ship and confined to her room. 3 armed guards were posted outside her door, and a 4th in the courtyard below the window. There was nothing she could do. The men were wearing mind shields, and had clearly been summoned by Central Officer Bradford in advance. Akira knew exactly what was happening. Bradford might be one of XCOM's best, but he was old, his thoughts slow and transparent. Akira knew that while she languished in her room, all of her friends were being detained and her research seized. Most of Dr. Weir's paperwork was left behind at the test site in Fort Riley, but Akira was sure her parents had already recovered the documents and turned them over to Bradford. The technology she took from Site X was most certainly in Tigan's custody as well. There was nothing Akira could do or say to convince her parents to listen to reason. They had already made their decision. Blake, Chihiro, Bradford, Shen, Taigen, all of them. Everybody was assuming that Akira's motives were tainted because she was traumatized. Akira felt a boiling mass of anger and hatred welling up inside of her. Her family thought she was broken. Couldn't they see the truth? The whole world was broken, and her parents were the ones responsible. As soon as Akira created something that could upset the fragile balance the Robinsons cobbled together, they decided to take it away from her. Akira collapsed into her bed, halfway between crying and screaming. She hated her parents. She hated Bradford and Shen and Taigen. She hated everybody who had a hand in taking away her blissful paradise that was Kauai and its community. She wished things were different, that the history of the world could have gone down some other path so she wouldn't have to live in this hellish reality. Opening her eyes, Akira looked up at the two pictures on her wall. The first was the crushed butterfly. At some point, days ago, Akira had scribbled the words, "Ray Bradbury was right," under it. She sat up, grabbed her desk lamp, and threw it across the room, where it shattered into pieces and plunged the room into darkness. According to chaos theory, her action would have repercussions, large and small, throughout not just this place and moment, but across the whole world and for all of time. Perhaps the loud crash disturbed the sleep of some other person, setting their life on a wholly different course. Or maybe the absence of the lamp itself would cause some great change many decades from now. What mattered most was that everything in the universe was interconnected through both time and space. The death of a single butterfly on Earth could change the course of everything around it, leading to radical changes in the timeline millions of years later. When Akira first started on this project, she kept a list of moments in history she would like to change. Things that, if they played out differently, would lead to a world where Akira could live out the rest of her days with Rafi on Kauai. She knew her parents would see the whole plan as selfish. But after everything they put her through, Akira felt she was entitled to a self-indulgent fantasy or two. After all, traveling backwards in time wasn't possible. At least, that's what Akira reminded herself whenever she seriously considered enacting her plan. But then, just like she was doing right now, she would look at the second image on her wall. It was a snake, curled up into a circle, with its tail clamped firmly in its mouth. The words of Dr. Weir drifted through Akira's mind. This just reopens the issue with circular time again. In his many years of research, Weir never managed to determine exactly how time flowed. Did time move in a straight, linear fashion, from a start point to an end point? Or does time flow in a circle, from one loop to the next, in an unending progression? While Weir never proved it one way or another, he seemed to have hedged his bets on time being a circular loop, and that was the crux of the theory. If Akira could use a modified time ship to move forward in time, she might be able to loop around the end of the universe and come back to the beginning. In a sense, backwards time travel was possible, but it required moving in a counterintuitive direction. Of course, all of this was hours away from being moot. Akira was still sensing the thoughts of people around her. The word intervention was becoming more and more commonplace as the night went on. It was obvious. Somehow, Akira's parents and the XCOM leaders were going to confront her and force her to abandon all hope of going back to the way things were on Kauai. In these precious few hours to herself before that confrontation began, Akira needed to make a decision, one that would alter the course of her life and the lives of everyone around her forever. On the one hand, If she chose to stay here in the colony, Akira would have a life. She would definitely live under her parents' control and supervision and be some degree of miserable without her friends or her passion. But she would have a life. That was certain. But there was the alternative. The crazy, insane, and totally ridiculous alternative. Akira understood the theory and could rig up another time ship. She even knew where to find a progenitor hyperspace core. But there was too much uncertainty. There was no way for Akira to know what was waiting for her beyond the end of time. Would she loop around at the beginning again? Or maybe just her molecules would make the trip. Not to mention the incredible cost. She would be leaving behind all of her family, never to see them again. But if, just if there was even the smallest chance that Akira could make it out of the future and into the past, then she might be able to live on Kauai again, with Rafi. Akira closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She could hear the thoughts and plans of people outside the tenement. Somebody was getting ready to take Akira from her room and move her to the containment facility, whatever that was. It was now or never. This world looked at Akira like she was a lost cause. Well, now this world was a lost cause to her. She had a chance, a slim chance, to change everything and build a happier existence. Akira made up her mind. She would build another time ship. She would remake the past and make a better world. Or more likely than not, she would die in the attempt. Both outcomes were preferable to the alternative. Akira knew what she had to do, but she did not want to harm or kill anyone. She refused to be like her violent parents. She would give people the chance to save themselves before she used her one and only weapon. Akira got out of bed and moved to her dresser. She pulled out the brightest, most visible and reflective clothes she owned and got dressed. In the dark room, Akira was highly visible in her new outfit. A white t-shirt with gray shorts, a silver belt, and white sneakers. Dressed like this, Akira could be spotted from 10 miles away. She would take no one by surprise tonight. Taking one last look at her broken butterfly and Ouroboros, Akira gathered up her strength and willpower. Then she pushed open the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. 3 men, ex-com soldiers, took a step back from Akira's door, looking surprised at her sudden appearance. Miss Robinson, you need to wait in your room," one of the soldiers said. "Your parents should be along to pick you up soon." Akira didn't reply. She centered her mind and projected all of her focus onto the soldiers before speaking aloud. "Put your weapons on the floor and lay down." To her satisfaction, all 3 men complied with her orders, seemingly unaware of the telepathic attack they were just hit with. By the time the men came back to their senses and scrambled to their feet, Akira was out the front door and running. It was the middle of the night, the sky filled with stars, so Akira looked like a ghost as she sprinted away from the tenement. Slowing down to catch her breath, Akira reached out with her gift, trying to locate her chosen companions. There were hundreds of people in the surrounding buildings, but fortunately, Akira had learned to recognize the minds of people under her influence and pick them out of a crowd. In seconds, she found Scarlett, Inez, Ingrid, and Pascal. They were all being kept in separate locations under guard. Of course, that wouldn't be a problem for Akira. The first person she retrieved was Scarlett. Akira breezed through the building, a medical clinic, without facing any resistance. Anyone who saw her was quickly bewitched and left in a confused state. Bursting into Scarlett's room, Akira declared, "I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back." By this point, Scarlet was so far under Akira's telepathic influence that she simply couldn't refuse. The pair fled together. Inez was the next to be sprung, and this was where a general alarm was finally raised. Lights began clicking on all over the colony. XCOM soldiers ran out of the armory to take up positions near the gate. At Akira's insistence, there was no violence. Each time the escapees were confronted, Akira used telepathy to confuse and disorient their pursuers. Dazed and confounded XCOM soldiers wandered the colony, while Akira, Inez, and Scarlet honed in on Ingrid and Pascal, who were being kept together. This time, the guards were alert and ready. Even before she entered the residential building, Akira could sense a pair of mental dead zones that gave away the presence of mind shields. So instead of attacking their minds, she went for something else. Rounding the corner as fast as she could, Akira used telekinesis to grab and pull the weapons out of the hands of both soldiers. A stun baton clattered to the floor, while an arc thrower landed squarely in Akira's outstretched palm. "This is going to hurt," Akira said, "and I'm really sorry about this." Two loud cracks shook the building, and just for a second, Akira was blinded. Both men crumpled to the ground, their bodies twitching from the powerful electric shock. Once she and her friends were out of danger, a painful decision had to be made. "So you're going to take a chance?" "Thought you would." Pascal Etienne hugged Akira before reaching to embrace the others. "In my condition, the most I can do is wish you good luck." "Are you sure you can't come with us?" Ingrid asked. "Your life could be so much better where we're going. The past, the future, any place that isn't here and now must be so much better for you." Pascal nodded. "You are most definitely right, but I'm in no shape to make the journey. I'm able to remember the days when I could see, and I know quite well that a blind man will hinder you tonight. Go on, get going." Akira was very reluctant to leave Pascal behind, but as soon as she realized it was the only option, a small telepathic pulse jumped to Scarlet, Inez, and Ingrid. The trio converged on Akira and told her to honor Pascal's wish. Hasty goodbyes were given, and then Akira and her companions slipped out the way they came. As the foursome fled towards the airport, Inez asked a crucial question. "I get we're taking the Angel, but did we ever figure out where we could get one of those hyperspace cores? 'Cause we're not gonna do any time travel without one." "Don't worry," Akira replied. "I know where all three of them are." "What? How?" Scarlet asked. As the group rounded a corner and came into the airport, Akira called back, "My parents saw them during the war in heaven. They're near the moon, where Jericho died. We just have to get there, and then—" "And then what? Rob someone's grave? Defile a sacred place? Or do you just want to watch the world burn?" The voice came from the dark space just ahead, where lights suddenly clicked on. The airport runway was illuminated by floodlights, and then Akira and her companions stopped in their tracks. The Archangel was just 100 feet away, parked on the taxi road. In between the spaceplane and Akira were 9 people. Blake, Chihiro, Alexander, James, Josiah, Asuna, Bradford, Shen, and Emmanuel. They formed a semicircle around the escapees, blocking the way. However, only 2 of them were armed. Chihiro was holding the Shadow Keeper in her left hand, and the katana of the chosen assassin in her right. Blake was carrying an arc blade. The weapon emitted an orange light as the electrified sword hummed with power. For a tense few moments, the standoff proceeded in silence. Akira looked from one person to the next and realized that everyone except her father was wearing a mind shield. She focused her efforts against Blake's mind and found a powerful new resolve filling his consciousness. To her alarm, Akira realized that her father was also radiating psionic energy. Blake had taken his right arm out of its sling and confidently gripped his weapon in his left hand. He and his wife stared down their daughter together. their expressions a mix of shame and anger. "So this is what it was all building up to?" Chihiro demanded. "A plot to alter time? To rewrite history? You're just going to erase your family and start over?" "Why are you doing this?" Josiah called out. "This doesn't make sense." "Your parents risked everything to save you," Shen said. "Don't tear your family apart like this." "No matter what's happened," Asuna signed, "we still love you. You're our sister. You're my sister." They were trying to shame Akira into backing down. It was not going to work. She had settled her thoughts, made her peace. Akira knew there was no going back. She took a defiant step forward. Everyone except her parents yielded an equal amount of ground. At the same moment, Akira sent a telepathic command to Inez, Scarlet, and Ingrid. All three of them raised their hands in a gesture of surrender and started to back away from Akira, shrinking into the darkness. "I was happy," Akira spoke to her parents. "My life on that island was better than it was here. Then you came. I begged you not to hurt my new friends, the people who loved me." "Loved you?" Blake retorted. "Akira, they kidnapped and brainwashed you." "Liar!" Akira screamed. "Sally Ann didn't do anything to hurt me. Ruffy loved me." "You were on drugs!" Shen cried out. "So were they! Akira, that whole island, their community, everything about it was a lie. The air you were breathing was mixed with—" Akira let out a laugh. A stilted, psychopathic laugh that didn't suit a teenage girl. "Are you kidding me? The sweet air? Now you're just making things up." Chihiro looked her daughter in the eyes. Akira could feel an incoming psionic attack and raised her mental defenses just in time. She returned her mother's gaze and said, "Get out of the way. I'm going to take my life back, to take my future back, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." "What you're planning to do is insanely dangerous," Bradford said. "You can be damned sure we're going to try and stop you." "Time is a fundamental element of the universe," Blake told Akira. "We might all suffer if you tamper with history." "Or maybe we'd all have a better life," Akira retorted. "Ever think of that?" "It's just not worth the risk." Blake raised his voice. "Too much can go wrong, too many variables to account for, and if you get it wrong—" Blake reached into his coat pocket and produced a sheet of paper. It was one of the drawings Akira made while studying chaos theory. The butterfly stood out like a sign from the heavens in the dark of the night. "Akira, we cannot let you do this," Blake finished. "You won't take away our future." "It's not your future," Akira seethed. "It's mine!" The conversation had run its course. There was nothing left to be said. Blake and Chihiro nodded at one another. Then Chihiro dropped her pistol. The Shadowkeeper clattered to the pavement, and both Robinson parents clutched their swords in low-ready positions. "Akira, we don't want to hurt you," Blake said. "We will stop you, but you are still our daughter, and we love you, no matter what happens." Akira's reply was filled with hatred. "I don't care. You killed Rafi. You murdered the only man who ever loved me." Akira clenched her fists. Blue and purple soul fire sparked into existence, wrapping her hands and arms in supernatural fire. Blake and Chihiro both raised their swords, ready. There was a pause, lasting only a fraction of a second. But in that instant, the fate of this universe and all universes that followed was decided. It was Akira who struck first.